Chapter 1. The Village Whisper. In the quiet village of Street Mary, Me, where the hedge bloomed with late summer roses and the church bells chimed with reassuring regularity, Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking softly. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished floor of her modest sitting room. To an outsider, she might have appeared merely an elderly spinster, her silver hair neatly pinned, her eyes bright behind spectacles, engrossed in her wool. But those who knew Miss Marple understood that her mind was as sharp as her needles, and her ears caught every whisper that stirred the village air. It was a Tuesday, and the post office was abuzz with the usual chatter. Miss Marple, having ventured out for a skin of yarn and a breath of fresh air, lingered near the counter, her basket hooked over one arm. Mrs. Clement, the vice's wife, was holding court, her voice carrying over the clink of coins and rustle of envelopes. "And I tell you, Margaret," she said to Mrs. Price, the postmistress, "there's something queer about Blackthorn Manor. That new A's, Miss Evelyn Hartley, hasn't been seen in a fortnight, not at church, not at the market, nowhere." Mrs. Price, whose round face was made for gossip, leaned forward. "They say she's taken ill, but I heard from Polly, the grossest girl, that a black cat's been prowling the manor grounds every night. Bad luck, that island. My gran always said, a black cat crossing your path means trouble." Miss Marple's needles paused in her lap, though her expression remained placid. A black cat? How curious. In her experience, village rumors often held a kernel of truth wrapped in layers of exaggeration. She adjusted her shawl and stepped closer, pretending to examine a display of postcards. "Oh, come now," said Mr. Harris, the butcher, who had just entered with a parcel of stamps. "Cats don't make eyes vanish. Likely she's off in London, spending her fortune on frocks." Mrs. Clement shook her head. No. Polly swears she saw lights flickering in the man's east wing last night, where no one's lived since old Mr. Hardley passed. And that cat, jet black with eyes like emeralds, she says, sitting on the wall, bold as brass. Miss Marple's lips twitched. She had known the Hartley family, though not intimately. Blackthorn Manor, perched on the hill overlooking Street Mary Me, had been a grand estate once, but years of neglect had left it shrouded in ivy and secrets. Old Mr. Hartley, a reclusive widow-rower, had died 2 years prior, leaving the estate to his distant niece. Evelyn, the young woman, had arrived only a month ago, stirring curiosity with her city manners and fine hats. Her absence now was indeed peculiar. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said mildly, joining the conversation as if by chance, "Miss Hartley is simply resting. Young ladies from London often find our village pace a bit overwhelming." Mrs. Clement turned, her eyes brightening at the chance to draw Miss Marple into the gossip. "Oh, but Miss Marple, it's not just that. My maid Jenny heard from the manor's cook that Miss Evelyn was seen arguing with a gentleman caller last week. A tall fellow in a dark coat with a temper, they say. And now, poof, she's gone. Gone." Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but her mind was already turning. Surely someone has called at the manor to check on her. Mrs. Price lowered her voice. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Gibbs, says Miss Evelyn is indisposed. But mark my words, something's amiss. That black cat's no ordinary creature. My gran—" Yes, your gran," Mr. Harris interrupted, rolling his eyes. "Next you'll say it's a witch's familiar." The group laughed, but Miss Marple did not join in. She thanked Mrs. Price for the yarn, bid the others good day, and stepped into the warm September light. As she walked home, her eyes scanned the cobbled lane, noting the familiar faces. Young Tommy Blake delivering milk, Mrs. Weatherby tending her garden, but her thoughts were elsewhere. A missing Aries, a mysterious gentleman, a black cat, and lights in an abandoned wing. It was, she decided, a puzzle worth unraveling. That evening, as she sipped her tea and resumed her knitting, Miss Marple made a mental note to pay a visit to Blackthorn Manor. She had a knack for noticing what others missed, and something told her that the whispers of Street Mary Me were only the beginning. Before we move on, Detective, where in the world are you solving mysteries with us? Drop your location in the comments, and if you're craving more twisted tales, hit subscribe. Tomorrow's case file gets even darker. Stay sharp. Chapter 2. The Manor's Shadow. The path to Blackthorn Manor wound up a gentle hill flanked by ancient oaks whose branches formed a canopy against the pale autumn sky. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her sensible tweed coat and a hat adorned with a single pheasant feather, carried a small basket of homemade scones, a pretext for her visit. In street, Mary Me, a gift of baked goods, could open any door, and Miss Marple was adept at turning neighborly gestures into opportunities for observation. The manor loomed ahead, its grey stone facade half hidden by ivy that clung like a shroud. The windows, tall and narrow, stared down like unblinking eyes. As Miss Marple approached the iron gates, she noticed a black cat perched atop a crumbling pillar, its emerald eyes fixed on her. It blinked once, then leapt down and vanished into the undergrowth. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Cats, in her experience, were often less mysterious than people made them out to be, but this one had an air of purpose. The heavy oak door creaked open before she could knock, revealing Mrs. Gibbs, the housekeeper, a stout woman with a face like a tightly drawn purse. "Miss Marple," she said, her tone polite but, guarded. "What brings you here?" "Oh, Mrs. Gibbs. I was passing by and thought Miss Hartley might enjoy some scone," Miss Marple said, her voice as warm as the September breeze. "Is she at home?" Mrs. Gibbs hesitated, her fingers tightening on the door frame. "Miss Evelyn is indisposed, but I'll see she gets these. Thank you kindly." She reached for the basket, but Miss Marple, with a gentle smile, stepped past her into the dim hall. "I shan't much of your time," Miss Marple said, her eyes already scanning the surroundings. The hall was grand but neglected, with dust motes dancing in slants of light. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister chipped, and a faded portrait of old Mr. Hartley glowered from the wall. Such a fine house. It must be a challenge to keep up. Mrs. Gibbs shut the door with a thud. It island. With so few staff, just me, cook, and young Sarah, the maid. Miss Evelyn doesn't like fuss. Miss Marple nodded, noting the housekeeper's clipped tone. "I heard there was a gentleman caller recently. A friend of Miss Hartley's, perhaps." "Mrs." Gibbs's eyes narrowed. "Village gossip, I suppose." "Yes. A Mr. Vincent Cole called last week. A solicitor, I believe from London, but he's gone now." Before Miss Marple could press further, a door off the hall opened, and a young woman appeared. Sarah, the maid, her apron askew, and her cheeks flushed. "Mrs. Gibbs. Cook says the ladder is short again," and she stopped, spotting Miss Marple. "Oh, beg pardon, ma'am. No trouble at all, dear," Miss Marple said kindly. "You must be Sarah. How is Miss Hartley faring? The village is quite concerned." Sarah glanced at Mrs. Gibbs, who gave a sharp nod. "She is resting, Mom," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Keeps to her room mostly." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "I see. Well, perhaps I could leave a note for her to wish her well." Mrs. Gibbs led her to a small parlour where a writing desk stood beneath a dusty chandelier. As Miss Marple took a sheet of paper, she noticed a crumpled note half tucked beneath a blotter. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. "The cat sees all. Meet me at midnight, East Wing." Her heart quickened. but she kept her expression serene, slipping the note back as Mrs. Gibbs turned. "There we are," Miss Marple said, handing over a neatly penned message for Evelyn. "Do give her my best, and mind that cat I saw outside. It looked rather bold." Mrs. Gibbs' face tightened. "That creature's been a nuisance, always lurking. I'll have Sarah shoo it off." As Miss Marple left the manor, the black cat reappeared, weaving through the grass at a distance. She paused, watching it slip toward the east wing, where the windows were dark and shuttered. The note's words echoed in her mind. "The cat sees all." A fanciful phrase, perhaps, but in street, marry me, even the fanciful, who could hide a truth? Miss Marple adjusted her hat and started down the hill, her thoughts as tangled as the ivy on Blackthorn Manor's walls. Chapter 3. The Cat's Curse. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy sitting room, a pot of Earl Grey steaming on the table beside her. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the carpet, and her knitting lay idle in her lap as she pondered her visit to Blackthorn Manor. The cryptic note she had glimpsed, "The cat sees all. Meet me at midnight, East Wing," had lodged in her mind like a burr. It was, she thought, the sort of melodramatic phrase one might find in a penny dreadful, yet it hinted at something more sinister. And then there was that black cat with its unnerving stare. Her musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Bantry, her friend from the nearby Bantry Hall, her cheeks rosy from the brisk walk. "Jane, you'll never guess what I heard at the Women's Institute," she exclaimed, settling into an armchair. "They're all talking about that black cat at Blackthorn Manor. Apparently it's no ordinary animal. It's part of an old curse." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A curtsy, do tell." Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It goes back to old Mr. Hartley's grandfather, Silas Hartley, who built the manor in the 1800s. They say he was a ruthless man, made his fortune in trade, some say smuggling. He had a black cat he doted on, treated it better than his own kin. When the cat died, he went half mad, claiming it was poisoned by a rival. He cursed the manor, saying its spirit would haunt anyone who crossed the Hartleys." Miss Marple poured tea, her hands steady. "And this cat, or its ghost, is said to be prowling now." "Exactly." Mrs. Bantry took a sip, her eyes wide. "Mrs. Weatherbeeby swears it's the same creature, or its descendant. She says it appears whenever misfortune strikes the family. And now, with Miss Evelyn missing, well, the village is in a tizzy." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Village tizzies are often more fiction than fact, but there's usually a grain of truth. Did Mrs. Weatherby mention anything about the East Wing?" Mrs. Bantry frowned. "The East Wing? Not specifically, but she did say Silas Hartley locked it up after his cat died. No one's used it since." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just a passing thought," Miss Marple said, though her mind was racing. The note's mention of the East Wing, combined with the cat legend, suggested a connection, perhaps symbolic, perhaps literal. She resolved to learn more about the manor's history. The next morning, Miss Marple visited the village library, a small room tucked behind the church. Miss Ellis, the librarian, was a fountain of local lore, her spectacles perpetually perched on her nose. "The Hartley family records," Miss Ellis repeated, adjusting her cardigan. "We have a few old ledgers and letters, but they're dreadfully dusty." "What are you looking for, Miss Marple?" "Anything about Silas Hartley and his unusual attachment to a cat," Miss Marple said, her tone light. Miss Ellis bustled to a shelf and returned with a leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed. "This is a diary kept by Silas's sister Clara from 1842. It mentions the cat often. Ebony, she called it. Here, see for yourself." Miss Marple turned the brittle, pages, her eyes scanning Clara's neat script. One entry caught her attention. Silas grows stranger daily. He swears Ebony sees into men's souls and guards our secrets. Last night he locked the East Wing, saying, "It's Ebony's domain now. I fear his mind is turning." Another entry dated weeks later was more alarming. Ebony is dead, and Silas rages. He speaks of a curse of vengeance. I saw him hide something in the East Wing before he sealed it. God help us. Miss Marple closed the diary, her thoughts whirling. A cat that guards secrets, a sealed wing, and now a missing heirs. The pieces were scattered, but she felt the pattern forming as it always did. As she thanked Miss Ellis and stepped into the crisp air, she glanced toward Blackthorn Manor on its hill. Somewhere in its shadows, she was certain, lay the key to Evelyn Hartley's disappearance, and perhaps to the Black Cat's curse. Chapter 4. A guest goes missing. The morning mist clung to street, marry me like a veil, softening the edges of the village as Miss Jane Marple made her way back to Blackthorn Manor. Her visit the previous day had left her with more questions than answers, and the discovery of Clara Hartley's diary had only sharpened her curiosity. The cryptic note, the black cat, and the sealed East Wing formed a puzzle that demanded her attention. Armed with a fresh batch of lavender shortbread, another excuse for neighborly concern, she approached the manor's gates, her eyes alert for any sign of the elusive feline. The same black cat was there again, perched on the garden wall, its tail flicking like a metronome. It watched her with unblinking green eyes before slipping into the shrubbery. Miss Marple noted its path toward the East Wing, where the windows remained dark and shuttered. She knocked at the door, expecting Mrs. Gibbs' stern face. But it was Sarah, the young maid, who answered, her eyes red, rimmed, and her hands twisting in her apron. "Oh, Miss Marple," Sarah gasped, her voice trembling. "It's awful. Just awful. He's gone." Miss Marple stepped inside, her calm demeanor, a steadying presence. "Who's gone, dear? Take a deep breath and tell me slowly." Sarah gulped air, her words tumbling out. "Mr. Cole. Mr. Vincent Cole, the solicitor from London. He came back last night late to see Miss Evelyn. Mrs. Gibbs let him in, but this morning he's nowhere in the house. And Miss Evelyn still shut up in her room. Or so Mrs. Gibbs says." Miss Marple's brow furrowed slightly. "Mr. Cole, you say, the same gentleman who visited last week?" Sarah nodded vigorously. "Yes, Mom. He was in the parlor with Mrs. Gibbs last night talking low-ike. I heard him mention something about papers and the East Wing. Then he went upstairs, and now her voice dropped to a whisper. I found this by the back door this morning." She produced a small, mud-stained handkerchief from her pocket. Embroidered in one corner was a tiny black cat, and in the center was a smudge of what looked like ink, or perhaps soot, in the shape of a paw print. Miss Marple examined it closely, her fingers tracing the delicate stitching. "Curious," she murmured. "And where was this exactly?" "Near the East Wing entrance," Sarah said. "It's always locked, but I check the doors each morning." The handkerchief was just lying there in the grass. Miss Marple handed the handkerchief back, her mind racing. "And Miss Evelyn? Has anyone seen her today?" Sarah shook her head. "Mrs. Gibbs says she's still poorly, but I don't know, Mom. The house feels wrong. And that cat, it was outside my window last night, staring in, gave me the shivers." Before Miss Marple could reply, Mrs. Gibbs appeared, her face a mask of barely concealed irritation. "Sarah, stop your chatter and get to the kitchen. Miss Marple, I'm sorry, but this isn't a good time. We're all at 6s and 7s with Mr. Coo's absence." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "I only meant to leave some shortbread for Miss Hartley, but this business with Mr. Cole is concerning. Have you searched the grounds?" Mrs. Gibbs's lips thinned. "We've looked everywhere. He must have left early without a word. City folk are like that. Unreliable." Miss Marple nodded, though she privately doubted Mr. Cole had simply wandered off. "Might I have a quick word with Cook? She might have seen him last night." "Mrs." Gibbs hesitated, then relented, leading Miss Marple to the kitchen. Cook, a wiry woman named Mrs. Pye, was kneading dough with a vigor that suggested frustration. "Saw Mr. Cole last night?" "Yes," she said gruffly. "He was pacing the hall, muttering about finding it, and that cursed cat. Then he went toward the east wing. That's the last I saw of him." Miss Marple thanked her, leaving the shortbread on the counter. As she departed the manor, the black cat reappeared, darting across the lawn toward the east wing's locked door. The handkerchief, the note, the cat, and now another disappearance, all pointing to that forbidden part of the house. Miss Marple adjusted her gloves, her resolve firming. The manor's shadows were growing longer, and she intended to bring them into the light. Chapter 5. Tea and Suspicion. Miss Jane Marple's sitting room was a picture of cozy elegance, with chintz curtains framing the windows and a fire crackling in the grate. The table was set for Tit, adorned with her best bone china, and a plate of scone still warm from the oven. She had invited a select group from Street Mary Me: Mrs. Bantry, Mrs. Clement, Mrs. Clement, Price from the post office, and young Dr. Haddock, the village physician, under the guise of a friendly gathering. But Miss Marple's true purpose was to sift through the village's chatter, for she knew that gossip, like tea leaves, could reveal patterns when carefully stirred. As her guests settled in, their voices filled the room with the familiar hum of village life. Mrs. Bantry, ever animated, was recounting the latest about Blackthorn Manor. "2 disappearances now," she said, her teaspoon clinking against her cup. "First, Miss Hartley, and now this Mr. Cole. It's positively gothic, Jane." Mrs. Clement, nibbling a scone, nodded vigorously. "I heard from Sarah, the maid, that Mr. Cole was asking about the east wing before he vanished, and that black cat, my Jenny, swears it's unnatural, the way it watches the manor." Miss Marple poured tea, her movements deliberate, her eyes noting every glance and fidget. "It is curious," she said mildly. "Dr. Haddock, have you been called to the manor recently? To attend Miss Hartley, perhaps?" Dr. Haddock, a young man with a brisk manner, set down his cup. "Not since Miss Hartley arrived, I'm afraid. Mrs. Gibbs sent word she was managing with her own remedies. Bit odd, if you ask me. She's not the sort to fuss, but you'd think a young lady from London would want a proper doctor." "Mrs." Price leaned forward, her round face alight with intrigue. "I heard Mr. Cole was no ordinary solicitor. Polly at the grocer's says he was poking about the village, asking about old Mr. Hartley's will. Something about a codicil that never surfaced." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythmic counterpoint to the conversation. "A codicil? How interesting. Did Polly say who he spoke to?" Mrs. Price hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Well, she mentioned he met with Mr. Grayson, the old solicitor who retired last year, lives out by the mill now. Polly overheard them at the pub talking about hidden assets, and the cat's legacy sounded secretive." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "The cat's legacy. My goodness, the village does love its stories." She turned to Mrs. Clement. "You mentioned Sarah, dear. Has she said anything more about the manor's atmosphere?" Mrs. Clement dabbed her lips with a napkin. "Oh, she's all nerves, poor thing. Says the house cacks at night, and she's seen that black cat inside, slipping through doors that ought to be locked. She's half convinced it's a ghost." Dr. Haddock chuckled. "Ghosts and curses. Next you'll say, it's stealing the silver. It's just a stray, surely." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as ever, but animals do have a way of noticing things we overlook. I recall my nephew's cat, Tuppence, always knew when a storm was coming. Her guests laughed, but she noted Mrs. Bantry's thoughtful frown and Dr. Haddock's quick glance at his watch. As the tea drew to a close, Miss Marple steered the conversation to lighter topics, Mrs. Weatherby's prize roses, the church fete, but her mind was elsewhere. The mention of a codicil, Mr. Prize roses, Grayson's involvement, and Sarah's tales of the cat inside the manor added new threads to the web. She would need to speak with Mr. Grayson and perhaps Sarah again to untangle them. As her guests departed, she glanced out the window, half expecting to see a pair of green eyes in the dusk. The black cat was nowhere in sight, but Miss Marple felt its presence as if it were watching her as closely as she was watching it. Chapter 6. The Locked Room. The Air in Street. Mary Me carried the crisp bite of autumn. As Miss Jane Marple set out for Blackthorn Manor once more, her sturdy shoes crunching on the gravel path. The ville's whispers about curses and missing persons had grown louder, and the threads of the mystery, the cryptic note, the black cat, the codicil, were weaving a pattern she could almost grasp. Her pretext today was a jar of her homemade damson jam, but her true aim was the east wing, that forbidden part of the manor where secrets seemed to gather like dust. Mrs. Gibbs greeted her at the door, her expression as welcoming as a winter frost. "Miss Marple, you're becoming a regular visitor," she said, her tone edged with suspicion. Miss Evelyn still indisposed, I'm afraid. "Oh, I quite understand," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "I only thought to drop off some jam for the household. Might I have a quick word with Sarah? She seemed so distressed last time." Mrs. Gibbs hesitated, then nodded curtly, leading Miss Marple to the kitchen. Sarah was scrubbing pots, her hands trembling slightly. When Mrs. Gibbs retreated, Miss Marple lowered her voice. "Sarah, dear, you mentioned that cat getting inside. Has it been near the east wing?" Sarah glanced nervously toward the door. "Yes, Mom. Last night I saw it slip through a crack in the east wing door, the one that's always locked. I didn't dare follow. But it's not right, that cat being in there." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. "A crack, you say? Could you show me?" Sarah bit her lip, then nodded, leading Miss Marple down a dim corridor to a heavy oak door, its brass lock tarnished with age. A narrow gap at the bottom, barely wide enough for a cat, suggested the wood had warped over time. Miss Marple knelt, peering at the floor. A faint scuff mark like that of a shoe caught her eye, along with a single black hair trapped in the splintered wood. "Sarah," she said softly, "do you think you could find the key to this door just for a moment to ease an old lady's curiosity?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Mrs. Gibbs would have my hide, Mom, but I know where she keeps the spare keys. Wait here." She scudded off, returning minutes later with a rusted key, her hands shaking as she handed it over. Miss Marple turned the key in the lock, which groaned but gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a musty, shadowed hallway. Cobweb draped the walls, and the air smelled of mildew and thyme. Sarah clutched her apron, but Miss Marple stepped forward, her curiosity outweighing caution. They moved past empty rooms until they reached a small parlor, its furniture draped in dust sheets. On a side table, uncovered and oddly pristine, sat a small wooden box, its lid carved with the image of a black cat. Miss Marple lifted the lid, revealing a bundle of yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon. The topmost letter bore Silas Hartley's spidery handwriting, addressed to "My dearest Clara." She slipped it into her pocket for later reading, her heart quickening. As she closed the box, a soft thud echoed from deeper in the wing, a sound like a footfall. Sarah gasped, and Miss Marple held up a hand for silence. It's likely just the house settling, she said, though her eyes scanned the shadows. Let's be quick, dear. They retreated, locking the door behind them. As they reached the main hall, the black cat darted past, its green eyes flashing before it vanished up the stairs. Mrs. Gibbs appeared, her face thunderous. "What were you doing near the east wing?" she demanded. "Oh, just admiring the architecture," Miss Marple said airily, pressing the jam jar into Sarah's hands. "Such a grand old house. Thank you for indulging me." As she left the manor, the weight of the letter in her pocket felt like a key to the puzzle. The east wing, sealed for decades, was not as abandoned as it seemed, and the black cat, she suspected, knew more than it let on. Miss Marple hummed softly to herself, already planning her next move. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Night. The moon hung low over Street Merryme, casting a silvery glow across the rooftops. As Miss Jane Marple sat by her bedroom window, the letter from Silas Hartley open on her lap. Its contents, read by the soft light of a lamp, had been both illuminating and troubling. Silas wrote to his sister Clara of a treasure hidden where only Ebony's eyes can see, hinting at something concealed in the east wing before he sealed it. The letter ended abruptly, as if interrupted with a single cryptic line. "Beware the cat's shadow, for it guards the truth." Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched, her mind weaving through the threads of the mystery. Her thoughts were interrupted by a faint tap at the door. It was young Tommy Blake, the milk boy, his cap skew and his face pale in the moonlight. "Miss Marple." "Mum," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "I was passing Blackthorn Manor on my rounds, and I heard something queer voices like coming from the east wing, and I saw that black cat again sitting on the owl sill staring right at me." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Voices, Tommy. Could you make them out?" He shook his head. "Not clear, ma'am, but one was a man's, low and angry. I didn't stay long, gave me the creeps it did. Thought you'd want to know, seeing as you've been asking about the manor." "You did well, Tommy," she said, pressing a shilling into his hand. "Keep this between us, won't you?" He nodded and scampered off, leaving Miss Marple to ponder. Voices in the east wing where no one was supposed to be. It was time, she decided, for a closer look. The next evening, under the pretense of returning a borrowed recipe book to Mrs. Gibbs, Miss Marple arrived at Blackthorn Manor just as dusk settled. The housekeeper was nowhere to be seen, but Sarah, the maid, let her in, her eyes darting nervously. "It's not a good night, Mom," Sarah whispered. "There's been noises, creaks, and murmurs, like someone's moving about upstairs. And that cat, it's been yowling something fierce." Miss Marple patted her arm. "I shan't stay long, dear. Just leave this book and be on my way." But as Sarah turned to fetch Mrs. Gibbs, Miss Marple slipped toward the corridor leading to the east wing. The house was silent, save for the faint tick of a grandfather clock and the occasional groan of old wood. Then, from beyond the locked east wing door came a low, indistinct murmur. A voice, or perhaps two, too muffled to discern. She pressed her ear to the door, her heart steady despite the eerie atmosphere. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft thump, like something heavy being dropped. A moment later, the black cat appeared at her feet, its green eyes glowing in the dim light. It let out a low guttural yowl, then scratched at the door as if urging her to open it. Miss Marple hesitated. The key Sarah had used before was likely back in Mrs. Gibbs's possession, and forcing the door was out of the question. But as she stepped back, her foot brushed against something soft, a scrap of fabric torn and smeared with what looked like charcoal. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind racing. The cat, undeterred, darted down the corridor and up a narrow staircase, pausing to glance back at her. "Very well," Miss Marple murmured, following at a careful pace. The staircase led to a dusty landing, where a small window overlooked the manor's grounds. Through it, she saw a flicker of light in the east wing's upper windows. A faint wavering glow like a candle quickly extinguished. The cat leapt onto the sill, its tail flicking, and Miss Marple felt a chill that had little to do with the night air. Footsteps echoed below, and she retreated swiftly, reaching the main hall just as Mrs. Gibbs appeared, her face a mask of suspicion. "Miss Marple, what are you doing here? I thought you'd left." "Oh, I was just admiring the view," Miss Marple said, her tone airy. "Such a lovely old house, though. It must be a trial to keep up. I'll be off now." She slipped out before Mrs. Gibbs could press further, the scrap of fabric and the memory of that flickering light burning in her thoughts. The east wing was no longer just a locked room. It was a stage, and someone or something was playing a part in the dark. Chapter 8. The Heiress's Diary. Miss Jane Marple sat in her quiet sitting room. The scrap of charcoal-smeared fabric from Blackthorn Manor laid out on her table beside a cup of chamomile tea. The flickering light she had seen in the east wing the previous night, coupled with the muffled voices Tommy Blake had reported, suggested the manor was far from deserted. The black cat, with its uncanny knack for appearing at pivotal moments, seemed to be guiding her towards something or someone. Her fingers traced the fabric as she pondered her next step, but a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Sarah, the maid from the manor, her face pale and her hands clutching a small leather-bound book. "Miss Marple, I shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing nervously down the lane. "But I found this in Miss Evelyn's room when I was dusting. Mrs. Gibbs doesn't know I took it, but I think it's important." Miss Marple ushered her inside, offering a chair and a biscuit to steady the girl's nerves. "You've done the right thing, Sarah. What is it?" "It's Miss Evelyn's diary," Sarah said, handing over the book. "I only read a page, but it mentions Mr. Cole and other things. I didn't know what to do with it." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed as she took the diary, its cover embossed with a faint outline of a cat. "You go back now, dear, and don't breathe a word of this. I'll see it handled properly." Sarah nodded, scurrying off into the twilight. Alone, Miss Marple opened the diary, its pages filled with Evelyn Hartley's elegant script. The entries began with her arrival at Blackthorn Manor, brimming with excitement about her inheritance, but as Miss Marple read on, the tone shifted to unease. One entry, dated 2 weeks prior, caught her attention. "Vincent Cole arrived today. All charm and promises, but I don't trust him. He's after the codicil grandfather mentioned. A secret in the East Wing tied to that wretched cat statue. He thinks I know where it is, but I don't. Someone else is watching. I'm sure of it." Another entry a week later was more alarming. "I heard footsteps in the East Wing last night, though the door's locked. Mrs. Gibbs swears it's just the house, but she's lying. She's been too close to Cole, whispering in corners. And that black cat, it follows me everywhere like it knows my secrets. I found a note under my door. The cat sees all. I'm frightened." Miss Marble's needles, resting in her lap, lay still as she turned to the final entry, dated the day before Evelyn's reported absence. "I've decided to confront Cole tonight. He's hiding something about the codicil, about grandfather's fortune. If I don't return, look to the cat's shadow in the East Wing. It's the key to everything." The diary ended there, its remaining pages blank. Miss Marple closed it, her mind racing. Evelyn had suspected betrayal, and her mention of the cat's shadow echoed Silas Hartley's letter. The codicil, the East Wing, and the black cat were intertwined, and Vincent Cole's disappearance now seemed less like a coincidence and more like a calculated move. But by whom? She tucked the diary into a drawer, her thoughts turning to Mrs. Gibbs's guarded demeanor and Sarah's fear. Someone in the manor was playing a dangerous game, and the black cat, whether a living creature or a symbol, was at its heart. Miss Marple resolved to return to the manor, this time with a plan to uncover the truth hidden in the East Wing's shadows. As she sipped her tea, a faint yowl drifted through the open window, and she glanced out to see a pair of green eyes glinting in the dark, watching her from the garden wall. Chapter 9. The Garden Encounter. The late afternoon sun bathed Street Mary Me in a golden haze, but the chill of autumn lingered as Miss Jane Marple approached Blackthorn Manor once more. Evelyn Hartley's diary, with its talk of betrayal, and the mysterious cat's shadow, had sharpened her resolve. The black cat, the East Wing, and the missing codicil were pieces of a puzzle that seemed to shift with every step. Today she carried a small bouquet of chrysanthemums, ostensibly to brighten Miss Hartley's sick room, but her true aim was to observe the manor's inhabitants and perhaps catch a glimpse of the truth. As she neared the manor's gates, she paused, noticing a flicker of movement in the overgrown garden to the side. Slipping behind a yew hedge, she peered through the leaves. Two figures stood near a crumbling fountain, their voices low but heated. One was Mrs. Gibbs, the housekeeper, her posture rigid with anger. The other was a man Miss Marple didn't recognize, tall with greying hair and a tweed jacket, his face flushed as he gestured sharply. "You've gone too far, Gibbs," the man hissed, his voice carrying on the breeze. "If that codicil surfaces, it'll ruin everything. You were supposed to keep her quiet." Mrs. Gibbs's reply was sharp. "And you were supposed to handle Cole. Now he's gone, and the village is sniffing about. That meddling old woman was here again, poking her nose where it doesn't belong." Miss Marple's lips twitched, but she remained still, her eyes fixed on the scene. The man, likely Mr. Grayson, the retired solicitor Mrs. Price had mentioned, clenched his fists. "The cat statue's still hidden, isn't it? No one's been in the East Wing." "Not since you sealed it," Mrs. Gibbs snapped. "But that blasted cat keeps turning up, and Sarah's getting jumpy. If she talks, she won't." The shman cut in. "Keep her busy and make sure that wing stays locked. We're too close to let it slip now." Their voices dropped as they moved toward the house, and Miss Marple eased back, her heart quickening. The cat statue mentioned in Evelyn's diary was no mere ornament, it seemed, but a key to the codicil, and perhaps the disappearances. As she stepped onto the path, the black cat itself appeared, weaving through the grass, its green eyes locking onto hers before it darted toward the East Wing's wall. Miss Marple knocked at the manor's door, her bouquet in hand. Sarah answered, her face pale. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Gibbs is in a state today. I don't know what's got into her." "No matter, dear," Miss Marple said, handing over the flowers. "These are for Miss Hartley. Has there been any news of Mr. Cole?" Sarah shook her head, glancing nervously toward the garden. "None, ma'am, but I saw Mrs. Gibbs out there just now with a man. They looked cross like they were arguing." "Did they now?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but her mind was racing. "You've been most helpful, Sarah. Mind you, take care." She left before Mrs. Gibbs could appear, her thoughts swirling. The confrontation confirmed her suspicions. Mrs. Gibbs and Mr. Grayson were entangled in a scheme involving the codicil, and the East Wing's cat statue held the answer. As she walked down the hill, the black cat trailed her at a distance, its shadow stretching long in the fading light, as if daring her to uncover its secret. Chapter 10. The Cat's Trail. The twilight air was thick with the scent of damp earth. As Miss Jane Marple lingered near the edge of Blackthorn Manor's grounds, her eyes fixed on the black cat that had become her silent guide. The confrontation she had overheard in the garden, Mrs. Gibbs and Mr. Grayson plotting over a hidden coddle and a mysterious cat statue, had confirmed her suspicions of a deeper conspiracy. The diary, The note and the manor's locked east wing were all tied to the elusive feline, and Miss Marple was determined to follow its lead. As she stood by the garden wall, the cat appeared, its green eyes glinting like lanterns in the dusk. It paused, staring at her, then darted toward the manor's rear, where a narrow path led into a tangle of overgrown brambles. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and followed, her steps cautious but purposeful. The path wound past the east wing, where the shuttered windows loomed like closed eyes, and descended toward a small stone-out building, half hidden by ivy. The cat slipped through a gap in the door, and Miss Marple, peering through the grimy window, saw a faint glow inside. The door was unlocked, creaking as she pushed it open. The outbuilding, likely a gardener's shed in better days, was cluttered with rusted tools and cobwebs. In the corner, a lantern flickered, casting shadows across a wooden bench where a man sat, hunched over a pile of papers. He started at the sound of the door, his face illuminated, a gaunt, weathered man in his 50s, with a scar across one cheek. Miss Marple recognized him from village gossip. Tom Rackham, the manor's former groundskeeper, dismissed years ago for petty theft. "Mr. Rackham," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm, "I didn't expect to find you here." He scrambled to his feet, shoving the papers into a satchel. "Miss Marple, I was just checking the shed. Old habits, you know." His eyes darted to the cat now perched on a shelf watching them both. "No need to explain," she said, her tone gentle but probing. "Though it's curious, you being here with those papers. Are they from the manor? Perhaps something to do with Mr. Hartley's codicil?" Rackham's face palled, and he clutched the satchel tighter. "I don't know nothing about no codal. Just found these in the shed is all." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Found them, did you? With a lantern in a locked shed after dark, and with that cat keeping watch." She glanced at the animal, which let out a low yowl, as if in agreement. Rackham's shoulders sagged. "All right, I'll tell you, but you keep it quiet. I saw Mr. Hole sneaking about the manor last week before he vanished. He was digging through the east wing, muttering about a statue, a cat statue, he said, worth a fortune. I thought maybe I could find it first." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "And these papers, old letters mostly," he admitted. "Found them hidden in the shed wall. They mention a hiding place, something about the cat's shadow under moonlight. I was hoping to figure it out." Before she could press further, a rustle came from outside, and the cat leapt down, bolting through the door. Miss Marple followed, leaving Rackham to his papers. The cat led her back to the man's east wing, where it paused by a low window, its shadow falling across the ground in a perfect silhouette of a cat's head. The moonlight revealed something new, a faint outline in the stone like a concealed panel, barely visible in the dim light. Miss Marble's heart quickened. The cat's trail had led her to a new piece of the puzzle, and Tom Rackham's presence added another suspect to the list. As she turned to leave, the cat's green eyes met hers, and she felt a shiver of certainty. The truth was close, hidden just beyond that shadowed stone. Chapter 11. The Final Gathering. The drawing room of Blackthorn Manor was lit by the soft glow of oil lamps, casting flickering shadows across the faded wallpaper. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her knitting in her lap, her serene expression belying the sharpness of her gaze. She had requested a gathering ostensibly to discuss the village's concerns about Miss Hartley's prolonged absence, and Mrs. Gibbs, though reluctant, had agreed. The room was now filled with the key players in the mystery. Mrs. Gibbs, her face tight with unease, Sarah, the maid, fidgeting nervously. Mr. Grayson, the retired solicitor, his tweed jacket rumpled, and Tom Rackham, the former groundskeeper, slouched in a corner, his eyes darting. Doctor. Haddock, invited at Miss Marple's suggestion, stood by the fireplace, his presence lending an air of authority. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but clear. "The village is quite concerned about Miss Hartley and Mr. Cole. It's time we address these troubling disappearances." Mrs. Gibbs folded her arms. "I've told you, Miss Marple, Miss Evelyn is indisposed. As for Mr. Cole, he left of his own accord. There's nothing more to say." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Is that so? Yet Sarah mentioned seeing Mr. Cole head toward the east wing the night he vanished, and young Tommy Blake heard voices there. Curious, don't you think?" Sarah blushed, glancing at Mrs. Gibbs, who shot her a sharp look. Mr. Grayson cleared his throat. "Voices. Nonsense. Old houses creak and groan. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "But there's also the matter of the codicil to old Mr. Hartley's will which Mr. Cole was seeking. A codicil mentioning a treasure hidden in the east wing tied to a cat statue. You'd know about that, Mr. Grayson, wouldn't you?" Grayson's face weened. I handled Hartley's affairs years ago. If there was a codicil, it's long gone. You're chasing ghosts, Miss Marple." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Not ghosts. I think Evelyn's diary mentioned your interest in the codicil, Mr. Grayson, and Mrs. Gibbs's cooperation. And Tom, you were found with letters pointing to a hiding place in the east wing under the cat's shadow." Rackham shifted uncomfortably. "I told you I just found those letters. I wasn't part of no scheme." Dr. Haddock raised an eyebrow. "Scheme. This is getting out of hand. Miss Marple, do you have evidence, or is this just village gossip?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Evidence, Doctor, is in the details. A note saying the cat sees all. A handkerchief with a cat's paw print. A diary hinting at betrayal. And a cat statue that seems to hold the key. And then there's the black cat itself, always near the east wing as if guarding something or someone." Mrs. Gibbs snorted. "That cat's astray, nothing more." "You're spinning fairy tales." "Am I?" Miss Marple's voice was soft but piercing. "Then why was there a light in the east wing 2 nights ago? And why did I overhear you, Mrs. Gibbs, arguing with Mr. Grayson about keeping the codicil hidden?" The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Sarah's eyes widened and Rackham's hands clenched. Grayson started to speak, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "Before you deny it, consider this. The east wing's locked door has a crack just wide enough for a cat or a secret. I believe someone is still in that wing, and I intend to find out who." As she spoke, a low yowl echoed from the corridor, and the black cat slipped into the room, its green eyes fixed on the group. It leapt onto a table, knocking over a vase which shattered with a crash. In the chaos, Sarah gasped, pointing to the floor. "Look, there's something under the rug." Miss Marple knelt, lifting the edge of the rug to reveal a small trap door, its edges cleverly concealed. The cat sat beside it, its tail flicking as if daring them to open it. The truth, Miss Marple knew, was moments away from being revealed. Chapter 12. The Black Cat's Truth. The drawing room of Blackthorn Manor was thick with tension. The shattered vase lying in fragments as Miss Jane Marple stood beside the newly revealed trap door. The black cat, its green eyes gleaming, sat sentinel-like, its presence a silent challenge to the gathered suspects. Mrs. Gibbs, Mr. Grayson, Tom Rackham, Sarah, and Dr. Haddock. The trapdoor hidden beneath the rug seemed to pulse with the weight of the secrets it concealed. Miss Marple's serene gaze swept the room, her mind knitting together the final threads of the mystery. "Sarah, dear," she said gently, "would you fetch a crowbar from the kitchen? We must see what lies below." Sarah hesitated, then hurried off, returning with the tool. "Dr. Haddock," His skepticism giving way to curiosity, pried open the trap door, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A faint moan echoed from below, and Mrs. Gibbs's face pad. "It's just the cellar," she stammered. "Nothing down there but old wine and rats." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Then let's have a look, shall we?" With Dr. Haddock leading, the group descended, the black cat darting ahead. The air grew damp and cold, and the lantern Haddock carried illuminated a small stone-wall chamber. There, bound and gagged but alive, sat Evelyn Hartley, her eyes wide with relief. Beside her, slumped against the wall, was Vincent Cole, his face bruised but conscious. Sarah gasped, and Rackham muttered an oath. But Miss Marple's attention turned to a small alcove, where a stone statue of a black cat stood, its emerald eyes catching the light. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope marked with Silas Hartley's crest. "Dr. Haddock, please free them," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm. As he worked, she addressed the group. "This statue is the key to the codicil, isn't it, Mr. Grayson? The one you and Mrs. Gibbs were so desperate to keep hidden." Grayson's jaw tightened. "You've no proof, you meddling old—" "Oh, but I have," Miss Marple interrupted, her tone mild but piercing. "Evelyn's diary revealed your scheme to steal the codicil, which grants half the Hartley fortune to a charitable trust. You and Mrs. Gibbs locked Evelyn away to search the East Wing undisturbed. But Vincent Cole complicated matters. He was after the codicil too, wasn't he? Not for charity, but for his own gain." Cole, now freed, coughed and nodded. "Grayson promised me a cut if I helped find it, but when I got too close they turned on me." Mrs. Gibbs lunged toward the stairs, but Rackham grabbed her arm. "Not so fast," he growled. "I ain't part of this, Miss Marple. I was just after the statue, thinking it was worth something." Miss Marple nodded. "I believe you, Tom. Your greed was honest if misguided. But Mrs. Gibbs and Mr. Grayson planned to sell the manor and keep the fortune, betraying Silas Hartley's wishes." She picked up the envelope, opening it to reveal the codicil, its terms clear. "This ensures the Hartley legacy serves the poor, not greedy hands." Evelyn, supported by Sarah, spoke weakly. "The cat, it kept coming to my room, leading me to the trap door. I thought it was a sign." Miss Marple smiled. "And so it was. That cat, perhaps a descendant of Silas's Ebony, has been guarding the truth all along." She glanced at the statue, its eyes mirroring the living cat's, which now rubbed against her skirts, purring softly. Dr. Haddock shook his head, bemused. "You have a knack for this, Miss Marple. But how did you know the trapdoor was here?" "Details, Doctor," she said. The cat's shadow under moonlight, as the letters and diary hinted, pointed to this room. The rug's worn edge suggested frequent use, and the cat's insistence led us here. In Street Mary Me, even a cat can be a detective. The police were summoned, and Grayson and Mrs. Gibbs were taken away, their scheme unraveled. Evelyn, recovering, vowed to honor the codicil, and Cole, chastened, agreed to testify. As Miss Marple walked home under the stars, the black cat trailed her, its green eyes bright. She chuckled softly. "You've earned a saucer of cream, my dear," she said. And the cat, as if understanding, gave a contented yowl. The manor's shadows were lifted, and justice, as always, had found its way in the quiet village of Street Mary Me. Epilogue. The late autumn sun bathed Street Mary Me in a soft amber glow, and Miss Jane Marple sat in her garden. A woolen shawl draped over her shoulders. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically, crafting a scarf for the upcoming church fete, but her thoughts drifted to the events at Blackthorn Manor. The village had settled back into its familiar rhythm, though whispers of the black cat's curse still lingered over teacups and garden fences. Evelyn Hartley, fully recovered, had taken up residence in the manor once more, her resolve strengthened by the ordeal. The codicil, now safely filed, ensured that half the Hartley fortune would fund a hospital for the county's poor, a legacy that would outlive the manor's shadows, Mrs. Gibbs and Mr. Grayson awaited trial in London, their greed laid bare while Vincent Cole, contrite, had returned to Tayut, the city with a promise to reform. Tom Rackham, cleared of serious wrongdoing, had found work at a neighbouring estate, his days of treasure hunting behind him. Miss Marple smiled as Sarah, now promoted to housekeeper, visited her with a basket of apples from the manor's orchard. "Miss Evelyn's ever so grateful, Mum," Sarah said, her cheeks rosy. "She says you're welcome any time, and she's keeping that cat statue on the mantel as a reminder." "How kind," Miss Marple replied, offering a biscuit. "And the black cat. Does it still prowl the grounds?" Sarah laughed. "Oh, aye. It's taken to sleeping in Miss Evelyn's room. She's named it Ebony after old Silas's cat. Says it's her guardian." As Sarah left, Miss Marple's gaze fell on her own garden, where a familiar pair of green eyes peered from behind a rose bush. The black cat, Ebenezer's heir perhaps, stretched languidly, then sauntered toward her, rubbing against her skirts with a soft purr. She reached down, stroking its sleek fur. "You've done your part, haven't you?" she murmured. "Every village needs its watchers, human or otherwise." The mystery of Blackthorn Manor had unravelled like one of her skins of wool, each thread leading to the truth. Yet Miss Marple knew that Street Merryme, for all its quiet charm, would always hold new puzzles, waiting for a keen eye to solve them. As the cat leapt onto the garden wall, its shadows sharp against the setting sun, she picked up her needles, content in the knowledge that some secrets, like a cat's loyalty, were best left to guard themselves.